I didn't notice him at first. That's the thing about men like him. They become part of the furniture, part of the wall. The eye slides past them the way it slides past a cracked tile or a stain on the ceiling you've stopped registering because you've stopped expecting it to change. I was at the Nadra office on Shari Faisal that Tuesday morning. Second week of October. One of those Karachi mornings that hasn't decided yet if it wants to be cool or just pretend to be. The ceiling fans are going, but not committed. There were maybe 40, 50 people inside. Plastic chairs bolted to each other in long rows. A woman near the back with a baby that hadn't stopped fussing since I'd walked in. A teenager with his school uniform half untucked, scrolling his phone while his mother stared at the token number board like it owed her something. I had token 74. They were serving 51. So I sat, and I watched, because there's nothing else you can do in a government office except sit and watch and quietly negotiate with God about what other good deeds you've accumulated that might speed up the queue. That's when I noticed the old man. He was in a row diagonal to mine. Couldn't have been less than 65, maybe 70. White shower camise, freshly pressed. The kind of press that tells you someone else did it for him, a daughter or a wife, someone who ironed with intention. His hair was white and thin and combed back with care. He wore glasses with thick lenses and a frame that had been repaired at one hinge with a small piece of electrical tape, black against the silver. He was filling out a form. That wasn't unusual. Everyone in there was filling out a form. What was unusual was the way he was filling it out. He had a piece of paper beside the form, a torn notebook page, folded into quarters, and then unfolded and folded again so many times the creases had gone soft, almost transparent. He would look at the paper, then look at the form, then look at the paper again. Every single field. I watched him do it for the name field. He looked at his paper, then carefully, slowly, in Urdu, wrote his name. Then he double-checked it. Then came the father's name. Same process. Paper. Form. Right. Check. Then the address. Paper. Form. Right. Check. But when he got to the identity number, the 13-digit CNIC number, he didn't even look at the paper. His pen moved without hesitation. 13 digits. No pause. No check. No second glance. He wrote his CNIC number the way a man writes his signature after 40 years of practice. Like breathing. Like something his hand had learned to do without asking his brain for permission. I don't know why that hit me the way it did. Maybe because I've met people who've forgotten their own phone numbers, but still remember their childhood best friend's landline for 1994. Memory is strange that way. It keeps what it's used to. It keeps what it's had to repeat. I kept watching. His name was written on the piece of paper, Muhammad Bashir. Common name, salt of the earth name. The kind of name that belongs to school teachers and shopkeepers and men who pray 5 times and mean it. I know his name because about 20 minutes later, the counter lady called it out, the way they do, loud and clipped, and with the specific exhaustion of someone who has called 1,000 names and stopped believing any of them belong to real human beings. Muhammad Bashir. Counter number 3. The old man stood up slowly. The standing itself was a project. He braced one hand on the back of the chair in front of him, the other on his knee, and he rose in stages, the way you rise when your body has started keeping a running invoice of everything you've asked it to do over the years. He shuffled to counter 3. The girl at the counter, young, probably fresh out of some admin training program, her dipata pinned with that particular neatness that means she's still new enough to care. She took his form without looking at him. Started typing. Stopped. Looked at something on her screen. Yes, CNIC number Gallat high, she said. Flat. Not unkind, just factual. This identity number is wrong. The old man blinked. Gallat. On. Jahan Deko. She turned the monitor slightly, pointing. He leaned forward, squinted through his thick glasses. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out that folded piece of paper. Unfolded it. Studied it. Then he looked at what he'd written on the form. They were the same. Yato same hi, he said. This is the same. The girl looked again. Typed something. Frowned at her screen with the particular frown of someone who has found a discrepancy and isn't sure which version of reality to trust. Apka Purana record kuch or show kar raha hai. Your old record is showing something different. And just like that, the old man's face did something complicated. Not panic, not anger, something older than both, a particular kind of tired that you only recognize if you've seen it before. The tired of a person who has been told, more than once in his life, that his paperwork doesn't match, that his existence, on paper, doesn't quite line up with his existence in the world. I stopped pretending to look at my phone. His story came out in pieces, the way real stories always do, not in a clean narrative arc, but in fragments, pulled out by questions by the girl at the counter calling his supervisor, by more waiting. He was from Lyre originally. Came to Karachi in 1981. At the time, there was no CNIC. There was the old NC, the National Identity Card, a different system, a different number. That number had been his for 20 years. He'd written it on job applications, on ration forms, on his children's school admissions, on hospital paperwork when his wife had his first son, and then his second, and then when she was sick, and then when she wasn't anymore. When the CNIC system came in, the new one, the biometric one, the 13-digit one, his old records had to be migrated. And somewhere in that migration, someone had made a typo. One digit, the 7th digit of 13, a 3 that became an 8. He hadn't found out for years. He found out when his eldest son tried to list him as next of kin for something, and the number didn't match government records. They spent 8 months and for different offices trying to correct it. They thought they had. Apparently, they hadn't. Not completely. Some database somewhere was still carrying the error. A ghost of a mistake made by a clerk he'd never met, in an office he'd never visited, correcting a record he didn't know was wrong. Peli Wali ID Ka, number Mui Adebiyad High, he said to the supervisor, who had appeared, a tired-looking man in his 40s with a mustache that looked like it had given up. I still remember the old ID number. He said it. All 9 digits of the old national identity card number. From memory. Without the paper. The supervisor looked at him. The girl at the counter looked at him. I looked at him. He hadn't looked at us. He was looking at the table, at his hands. Hands were thin now, the knuckles prominent, the skin gone papery, and I had the feeling he wasn't really seeing the table. He was somewhere else. He was reading a number off a wall only he could see, a wall he'd been staring at for 45 years. I'm going to tell you something that might sound small. The CNIC number in Pakistan is 13 digits. 13 digits that you were assigned at birth. Or, if you were born before the system, that you are assigned when you register. These 13 digits follow a specific logic. The first digit is your province. The next 4 are your district and tahsil. The next 7 are your unique sequence number. And the last digit is your gender identifier. This is how the Pakistani state knows you exist. Not your name. Names repeat. Names get transliterated differently each time they're entered into a system. Names are spelled 14 ways, depending on who's holding the pen. Your name is human and, therefore, imprecise. The number is not imprecise. The number is you, rendered into something the database can use. I had never thought about what it means to know your number better than your name. I thought about it in that office. Muhammad Bashir had written his name from a piece of paper. He had written his number from his bones. The supervisor was trying to help. To his credit, genuinely to his credit, he wasn't dismissing the old man. He pulled up the old records. He made some calls. He typed with 2 fingers, but with conviction. While they waited, the old man sat down in the chair beside the counter. The supervisor had pointed at it with his chin, the specific Pakistani gesture that means sit, this will take time, I'm not telling you to leave, and the old man had sat with that same staged, patient arrangement of old limbs. I had moved. I'm not proud of the calculation involved. I had token 74. They were serving 58. I still had time. So I got up and walked to the small tea stall that was technically outside the building, but operated through a window cut in the wall. One of those arrangements that everyone pretends isn't there because it's technically illegal, but also essential to human functioning. I bought 2 cups of chai, the small ones in plastic cups. I walked back and set one down on the counter ledge beside the old man. He looked at it, then at me. Mera token lamba high, I said. My token's a long way off. Saad dene ko kuch chahiye. Something to keep me company. He accepted it the way old men accept small kindnesses, not with effusion, but with a nod that carried weight. A nod that said, "You're a decent person, and I am registering that." We didn't talk immediately. We drank our chai. The baby in the back had stopped fussing. Token 61 was called. Then, he said, without preamble, "Mare Bakpan Main, Hamera Gar Ka, Koinam Nahi the." When I was a child, our house had no name. I waited. Humara Mohola Kal Bhai proper nam Nahi Tiache. Liali mine Apyantai Hein. Van Su Ada Kuch register Nahi Ta Est Samani mine. He paused. To Mera Pela identity card. Wo Pali bar the Japagaz Parlika, the KH Mainhan. In Lyre, not much was officially registered in those days. My first identity card was the first time it was written on paper that I exist. He said it so plainly. The first time it was written on paper that I exist. Not the first time I felt important. Not the first time I was recognized. The first time my existence had a paper version. The first time the world had a receipt. Token 63 was called. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be smaller than what he just put in the air between us. So I held my chai cup and let it sit there. He continued at his own pace. That's the thing about old men who've carried a story for a long time. They don't need you to prompt them. They've been waiting for the right kind of quiet. He was 23 when he got his first NIC. He remembered going to the office with his older brother, who had already gotten his. His brother walked him through the form. Their father hadn't bothered. In those days, in that neighborhood, plenty of men went their whole lives without ever formalizing their existence on a government document. You were known by your face, by your family, by the chai shop where you took your chai, and the mosque where you took your prayers. But his brother had said, "Get it. You'll need it." For what? For everything. For later. Just get it. So he got it. And the number they gave him became, he paused here, looking for the word, turning his chai cup in his hands, became the name the government called me. Muhammad Bashir was what his mother called him. The 9-digit NIC number was what the state called him. He learned both. But one of them, only one, was the same every single time he wrote it. His name changed spellings. Muhammad became Muhammad, became Mohammed. Bashir became Bashir. In Urdu, in Roman Urdu, in English transliteration, his name was a shapeshifter adapting to whatever the clerk in front of him needed it to be. The number never changed. So he memorized the number. The supervisor came back with a printout. He set it on the counter with the careful energy of a man presenting evidence in a case he's cautiously optimistic about. "Dekho," he said to the old man. "Look, yeh raha aapka purana record, tohat uheksa sata kaheksa kumend uheksaka. Aur yek hai jo do mi trei main migrate hua. Yahan pe galti hui, yek digit." Here's your old record from 1989. And here's what was migrated in 2003. The error happened here, this digit. The old man looked at both documents. He held them side by side, arms stretched, the way people with glasses do when the object needs to be at precisely the right distance from the eye. "On," he said. "Yes. Apyetik kana padiga. Ek application Denny Hoagie, or South Mania documents." The supervisor began listing. Affidavit. Original NIC, if available. Proof of old address. Witness possibly. The old man listened with his whole body. That particular stillness of someone cataloging information they know they can't afford to lose. Pedi vali nits hai apkepas. Do you have the old NIC? Wotohan. Gamin hai. Yes. It's at home. Kapseraki hai. Since when? The old man thought about it. Pandi bar jaban. Woh omia no sute shaptazit shino kibat hai. Usike sat hai. Plastic nahi hai. Wohwali. Kagazwali. From when I first got it, 1979, it's with me. Not the plastic one, the old paper kind. A 46-year-old paper identity card, sitting in some drawer or envelope in a house in Lyre. Surviving the things paper survives against all reason. Humidity, floods, children, time. The supervisor blinked, and for a half-second his professional distance flickered. I saw it. The girl at the counter saw it. We were all doing the math. 1979 to now, and feeling the particular weight of that arithmetic. "Thik hai," the supervisor said. "Lu'ao. Humdektain. Bring it. We'll see." While we waited, me for my token, the old man for the next step, he talked. Not continuously. In the way of old men and cold weather when warmth comes in installments. He'd worked as a welder. 31 years at a fabrication workshop near the Karachi port. The same workshop, the same employer, until the employer's son took over the business and found more economical arrangements. He didn't say this with bitterness. He said it the way you'd report weather. It rained. Then it stopped. Then a different kind of rain began. He had 4 children. 3 sons, 1 daughter. The sons were in various states of getting by. The daughter was in Rawalpindi with her husband, who worked for some government contractor. She called on Sundays. He smiled, small and private. She says, come here. Everything's fine there. I say I'm fine here. Yahan here. Lyre. The place with no proper street names when he was a boy. The place the government hadn't gotten around to. The place that made him who he was before anyone wrote it down. I asked him, and I'm not sure why I asked. It wasn't the kind of question that announces itself before you've already said it. I asked him if he ever got tired of it. Of the forms. Of the offices. Of writing the same number over and over. He looked at me like I'd said something in a language he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Then he said, Thaknakia? Yeh, tohmeri sindaki ka hisab hai. Tired of what? This is the accounting of my life. I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I just held it. Token 74. My number. The board clicked over, and there it was. I stood up. The old man was still sitting, waiting for the supervisor to return with the next set of instructions, his folded paper in his lap, his chai cup empty and tilted slightly in his hand the way cups go when the mind holding them has gone somewhere else. I told him I had to go to my counter. He nodded. The wait nod again. I hesitated. I don't know exactly what made me say the next thing. Maybe it was the chai. Maybe it was the 46-year-old paper card sitting in a drawer in Lyre. Maybe it was the image I couldn't shake. This man, aged 23, walking into a government office with his older brother and being handed a number and understanding in some wordless animal way that this number was now the most permanent version of him the world would keep. Apka pura number yad hai. I asked, do you remember your full number? He looked at me. Then, without a pause, without a glance at the paper in his lap, he said all 13 digits. Clean, sequential, like a prayer he'd said so many times it had gone beyond language into reflex. I counted in my head. 13. All 13. Muhammad Bashir Biyad Hai, he added. His voice had something in it. Not quite amusement, not quite sadness. The combination of both that doesn't have a name. Muhammad Bashir, I also remember. He said it like a joke, like a man who had made peace with something that doesn't deserve peace and given it peace anyway, because that's the only way to carry it without it breaking you. Counter 7. The young man behind it was efficient. He processed what I needed in 7 minutes, which, for a government counter in Karachi, is the clerical equivalent of magic. Stamps. Signatures. 1 form. Done. As I was gathering my documents, I looked back at the row of chairs. The old man was still there. The supervisor had returned and was explaining something, gesturing at a form, writing something down for him to take home. The old man listened, nodded, took the paper that was handed to him and folded it, once, twice, with the automatic practice of a man who's been folding important papers into his pocket for 5 decades. He looked up, caught me looking. He raised his chin slightly. That's all. I raised mine back. Outside, the October air had made its decision. It was going to be cool today, after all. The street noise came at me in layers. A rickshaw, someone selling something from a cart with a megaphone, a school bus with its windows down. I stood there for a second. I know my own CNIC number. Most people my age do. We've filled enough forms. But I don't know it the way he knows his. I know it the way you know a pin, practiced but not inhabited, not written into the body. He knew is the way you know a scar. I went back to that office 2 weeks later. Different reason. Something from my mother, a correction on her own documents. These things tend to multiply. I didn't expect to see him. I didn't look for him. But when I walked in, the girl at counter 3, the same one with a neatly pinned dupatta, a little more comfortable now, a little less new, she was helping someone, and I had to wait near her station for a moment, and I said, without really thinking, Wo Bujurg Thay Kuch Hafton Pelly, safe kameez, modi glasses. Unka kamhua. That old man who came a few weeks ago. White kameez, thick glasses. Did his issue get resolved? She thought for a moment. Then something in her face softened in the way faces soften when they remember something that mattered. Aunt, she said. He came back the next week with his old NIC. We got his record corrected. She turned back to her current customer. I walked to my token area. The record corrected. 1 digit. A 3 changed to an 8 somewhere in 2003. 22 years of a ghost in the machine. 22 years of a man existing slightly wrong on paper while existing completely right in flesh and bone and 46-year-old paper cards and library drawers. Fixed, I've been thinking about forms, not the bureaucratic nuisance of them. Everyone thinks about that. Everyone complains about that. That's the easy thinking. I mean forms as objects, as artifacts, as the paper archaeology of a life. Think about what it takes to fill one. Name, father's name, date of birth, place of birth, current address, previous address, identity number. This is a biography stripped to its load-bearing walls. No context, no explanation, no room for the fact that your mother called you something, your grandmother called you something else, and your friend from the workshop had a third name for you that stuck for 30 years. No room for the years you weren't at your current address because the address where you grew up doesn't map onto any system. No room for the 2 years in between jobs that were not nothing. They were your daughter being born and your father dying and a flood that took the kitchen wall, but are recorded, if they're recorded at all, as a gap. Forms flatten everything they touch. But Muhammad Bashir had memorized the flattest version of himself, the 13-digit version, more completely than anything else. That's the thing I couldn't stop coming back to. I spoke to my uncle about it. He's 10 years older than me, was born before the CNIC system, went through the transition the way Muhammad Bashir did. I asked him, "Do you know your CNIC by heart?" He gave me a look like I'd asked if he knew how to breathe. Main any one number Zayada bar Lika, high apnea namesi, he said. I've written that number more times than my own name. I've written that number more times than my own name. There it was. The same thing. Casual. Factual. Not tragic. Just true. I asked him to think about it. Actually think about it. When does he write his name versus when does he write his number? He thought. Job applications. Number first, name secondary. Bank forms. Number required. Name is almost optional in comparison. Hospital registration. Number. Utility bills. Number. School admissions for his kids. Number. Voting. Number. Land records. Number. Police verification. Number. Pension forms. Now that he's near that age. Number. His name. He writes when he signs things. When he introduces himself. When someone who doesn't know him asks. But the state has never asked for his name the way it has asked for his number. The state says, your name is for people. Your number is for us. And people adapt. People learn the language the state uses. People write the number until the number is more automatic than the name. I started noticing it everywhere after that. The vegetable seller near my mother's house. I've bought from him for years. He has a small notebook where he writes credit on occasion for trusted customers. One day I saw him filling out something that looked like a bank form. His daughter was helping him, guiding his hand in places, and at one point, she asked him for the ID number. He didn't look up. He didn't stop to think. He said it while she wrote, the same way you'd recite a phone number you've dialed every day of your life. Like a rhythm already in motion. The security guard at the building where I used to work. Every month, the maintenance company logged everyone who worked in the building. Every month, a clipboard would make the rounds. The guard's name was different on different documents. Sometimes Irfan, sometimes Muhammad Irfan, once inexplicably listed as Arfan. His number was the same every single time. A woman at a hospital waiting area. I was there for something minor, the kind of hospital visit where the waiting is longer than the treatment. She was older, maybe 55, alone, and she was filling out the registration form with the focused deliberateness of someone who hasn't done it many times. She'd get stuck, look around, uncertain, look back at her form. But when she got to the ID number field, she pulled out a card. Not the CNIC itself, a small piece of paper, handwritten, and read from it. I thought about Muhammad Bashir's folded paper. I thought about how many people carry their own numbers written out for themselves because they cannot trust their memory with 13 digits. Because the number is so important that they have created a backup system. A paper memory for a thing that has become more load-bearing than their own name. There's a Pakistani poet, and I want to be careful here because I'm going off memory and I don't want to miss a tribute, who wrote something years ago about the violence of being assigned a number. The violence of the state reducing a person to a string of digits. The indignity of it. I have thought about that poem differently since the Nader office. Because here's what I keep landing on. Muhammad Bashir was not reduced by his number. He was kept by it. For a man who grew up in a neighborhood that the state barely acknowledged. No street names, no proper records, no maps that recognized you. The number was not a reduction. The number was a door. The number said, the state knows you're here. Not who you are, not what you've lived, not the 31 years of welding, or the daughter in Rawalpindi, or the paper inch in the drawer. But that you're here, that you exist in a form the world is required to respond to. For some people, a number is a cage. For other people, for people whose existence was for a long time not on paper at all, a number is the first time anyone official confirmed you were standing on this earth. Both of these things can be true. Both of these things are true. The same number means completely different things depending on whose hands are writing it and what history those hands are attached to. I went looking after that for any record of what the early CNIC system was like in places like Lyre. Not for a project or an article, just because I couldn't stop pulling on the thread. What I found was this. In the early days of the NIC system, the 1970s and 1980s, there were whole communities in Karachi's older neighborhoods where registration rates were low, where men in particular might work and live and die without their existence being formally inscribed. Sometimes this was because the system hadn't reached them. Sometimes it was because reaching the system required time and documents and a journey that working-class men with daily wages simply couldn't afford. When the CNIC computerization happened in the early 2000s, a massive push was made to bring in the previously unregistered. But it also required migrating old records, and that migration, done under pressure and at scale, produced errors. Digits transposed, names spelled wrong, dates wrong by a year, sometimes a decade. One digit changed, 7 positions into 13, a 3 becoming an 8. For a system that uses exact matching, one wrong digit means you don't match. You exist in the physical world, and you don't match in the digital one. And in a country where your number is what unlocks banking, property, pensions, health records, your children's documents, not matching means friction at every door. For the rest of your life, every time you need to be legible to any official system, you encounter the ghost of a mistake made 20 years ago by a person whose name you'll never know. 22 years of that. And he came in with his folded paper and his chai and his patience and his number memorized down to the bone. I keep thinking about what he said. Yeh, toh meri zindagi ka hisab hai. This is the accounting of my life. Not a complaint. Not a wound held up for inspection. Just a description. The way a farmer might say, Yeto midi ka kam hai. This is the work of soil. This is what you do when this is the life you have. He had spent decades learning to navigate a system that was not designed with him in mind. A system that would lose one digit of him in a database migration and not notice for years. A system where his name would be spelled 5 different ways across 5 different documents, and only the number would remain consistent. He had memorized the number. He had gotten the form. He had come back with the 46-year-old paper card. He had corrected the record. And then, I imagine, he folded the new receipt into quarters and put it in his pocket and walked out into the Karachi street and went home to Lyre, where his name was Muhammad Bashir, where nobody needed a number to know who he was. There's a particular kind of exhaustion in this country that doesn't have a good word in English. Urdu comes closer. Thaka hua nahi, balki gisa hua. Not tired, worn. The exhaustion of friction, of a life spent pushing against systems that require you to prove yourself over and over, to produce documents for your documents, to carry your history in your pocket, because if you don't carry it, someone will lose it. Muhammad Bashir was not a tragic figure. I want to be clear about that. He was a man who had figured out what he needed to do and had been doing it for 45 years with the quiet persistence of someone who understands that the world doesn't particularly reorganize itself around your inconvenience. But there's something that doesn't leave me. When I asked him if he ever got tired of it, the forms, the offices, the number, he looked at me like I'd asked something strange. And I wonder now whether it seemed strange to him because the question assumed there was an alternative. Because for him, this was simply what existing in Pakistan required. Not extraordinary, not exceptional, just the constant, patient, repeated act of proving that you are who you are, and you're where you say you are, and you have been here this whole time, even when no one was writing it down. His number was his proof. His number was his persistence. His number was, in the end, the most honest record of the life he had lived. Not because 13 digits can contain a life, but because the act of writing those digits again and again and again across 50 years of forms was itself a life, was the texture and labor of a life, was the thing you did between the things that mattered, which made the things that mattered possible. I know my CNIC number. I've known it for years, but I've never once written it the way he wrote it, without looking, without pausing, with the particular ease of things so known it has become invisible. Maybe that's the difference between people who have always been legible to systems and people who have had to fight their way in illegibility. For the legible, the number is an inconvenience, occasionally. For the others, the ones who grew up in neighborhoods with no names on maps, whose fathers never registered, who got their first NIC at 23, and understood in some wordless way that this piece of paper was the first time the world had written down that they were standing in it. For them, the number is not an inconvenience. It is a proof. It is a record. It is the accounting of a life. And they write it until their hands know it without asking, until the number is more theirs than their own name. Not because names don't matter, but because the number is the one thing nobody took from them, nobody spelled differently, nobody lost in a migration, nobody questioned. Except, of course, when they did. And even then, he came back with his 46-year-old paper card. And you made them fix it.